Stuck together. Steven is aboard the ship on the way back to Homeworld, saying that he's okay with whatever they do to him, while reassuring the others he is still Rose Quartz, ready to answer for her crimes. But then Lars is found stowed away inside the ship, carried up by a topaz and fused alongside Steven, who tells Aquamarine that she went back on the deal, though she doesn't care they have one too many humans. Aquamarine prepares herself to meet with the diamonds as the ship prepares for takeoff, with Steven apologizing to Lars for getting him captured, while Lars confesses that he was only on the ship still because he ran away after seeing Sadie get grabbed. He also says that he ran from the party prior to being abducted, and that he's always been a coward who can't deal with confrontation, which is why he is so abrasive in the first place. You can't have a bad interaction if you end the interaction quickly. As Topaz is working on fixing parts of the ship damaged by Alexandrite earlier, Steven urges Lars to use his pants as a lasso to grab a destabilizer from a rack to free them. But Lars refuses to do this at first before eventually relenting, then half-assing the attempt, missing completely. Lars says he's too worthless at everything to have even tried to save them, and then says that he is scared all the time. Steven admits that he's scared too, and also that he's grateful for Lars being with him so he isn't taken off to Homeworld alone. This conversation moves Topaz so much that she agrees to let them go, realizing she wouldn't want to separate from herself either. But Aquamarine catches her in the act of sending them to the escape pod, which she then destroys, lamenting that fusions always end up growing sentimental, and their feelings get in the way. Despite being threatened, Aquamarine convinces her to fall in line by saying that the Homeworld gems would never accept any rebellion from Topaz, and she defuses as they arrive, splitting up Lars and Steven while they head into the planet. The Trial. Steven is in a cell awaiting the trial of Rose Quartz and briefly speaking with an assigned blue zircon about the defense they could possibly make. But Steven doesn't want to defend his actions, insisting that he is guilty against legal counsel and hoping that during the trial he can convince the others that he acted alone so they'll spare Earth. The trial begins with Eyeball brought in to affirm that Steven is Rose Quartz based on his actions from Bubbled, where he healed her gem. Steven attempts to make his case by saying that he is guilty and so on, but Blue Diamond refuses to end the trial until she hears how it happened. Steven struggles to properly answer this question as he never considered the details of Pink Diamond's shattering. He assumes there was a fight and he assumes that Rose used the breaking point made by Bismuth, but this version of events doesn't line up with any of what they know of the incident. Realizing that the official record of events does not line up with what they know or at least what they can prove, Blue Zircon asks for Blue Diamond's palanquin to attempt to recreate the events. He points out that Pink Diamond was shattered shortly after leaving the palanquin, yet not a single gem in her entourage ever witnessed this or managed to stop it or warn her or even cry out before it happened, and it's unlikely that a mere quartz soldier would ever be able to get close enough without some sort of intervention. Then, Zircon points out that the only ones who would have the authority to alter records and cover up the details of this shattering would have to be someone as high-ranking as the Diamonds themselves. This infuriates Yellow Diamond, who poofs the lawyer, then poofs her own lawyer in rage. When Blue Diamond tries to calm her down, Steven and Lars use the fight as cover to escape into the palanquin, which Steven drives out of the courtroom and into the open space of Homeworld. As they fall into this alien, in more ways than one, world, Yellow Diamond points out they won't make it far. We are yet to see much of Homeworld so far. The only things we know about it are things taught secondhand regarding the culture and ideology there. This episode teaches us about the Diamonds more directly, that they have a facsimile of a properly run society, albeit not one that has an honest justice system or anything else. The society is so stratified based on the ranking of people that they accept things like trials not to determine a person's guilt, but to reiterate the Diamonds' decisions to punish them and to legitimize their existing power. In this way, the authority of the Diamonds is derived from the fact that they have this level of authority in the first place. Their power is used to maintain power instead of being used for their citizens. Off colors. Steven and Lars are on the ground floor of Homeworld, recovering from the crash of the palanquin. They don't have time to recover as they need to run from small, wandering eyes that are pursuing, scanning the two for gems and then opening fire. As they run, Lars frets that he spent too long running from things, even the stuff he enjoys, and now he's running once again. Then, the two are saved by an arm coming out of the ground, gesturing them closer. This arm belongs to a conjoined twin pair of Rudalites, who guides them deeper underground to a kindergarten that's been exhausted and abandoned. Here, they meet the Off-Colors, a group of Gyms hiding in secret from the rest of Homeworld due to their imperfections that mark them for shattering. The robots from the surface follow them underground, having followed Steven and Lars down there, and they begin to scan for Gyms to shatter. Lars cowers as always, but Steven tells him that it's okay to be afraid in a scary situation, putting his hand on Lars's chest like they did back in Lars and the Cool Kids. Inspired by this, Lars leaps forward to block one of the Off-Colors from being scanned. Due to not having a gym, he's practically invisible to the machines, so Lars begins attacking them with rocks and whatever else he can find as Steven works on deflecting their beams with the shield. They're able to destroy the robots, but the explosion from one launches Lars into a wall where he falls to the ground unmoving. Because it's a kid's show, they can't outright say that he dies, but they can have Steven check his heart and then start to cry. These tears, unlike those from an indirect kiss, wind up having healing properties that bring Lars back to life, though his skin is now glowing pink. We've seen how the Diamonds rule in order to strengthen their rule for themselves, but here we see how the rulers of Homeworld actually try to benefit the common people. This is to say, they don't. The way to judge a society is not by the extravagance of the best off, but the dignity of those at the bottom. The Diamonds live in luxury, with those below deferring to their whims. And those at the bottom are hunted for being imperfect in their eyes, rather than society trying to make a space for everybody. This is a thematic core of Rose's rebellion, that she did try to make a place that everyone belonged to, instead of making a place, then forcing others to fit in, or be shattered. Lars's Head. Lars is back to life, concerned a bit about his pink skin, but otherwise appearing to be fine. They don't get much time to ponder this as the robots from before are still patrolling the area, and the boulder they pushed in front of the entrance will only hold so long. Torn between staying put and eventually being discovered, or moving out and being discovered, the Off-Colors are unsure what to do. Lars is still recovering from being brought back to life, wondering if he's now a zombie and asking Steven if he has a heartbeat, which he does, but while checking this, Steven realizes that Lars's head has a portal in it. Steven asks for permission to go inside of Lars's head again, remembering before when he did this without asking and nearly ruining his life. And Lars agrees to this much more literal entry. Steven then appears inside of the field that makes up Lion's Mane, walking over to Rose's island and appearing back inside the temple. Immediately, Steven grabs some food and water as he hasn't eaten or drank in days, then stocks up on supplies to bring back through the main to Lars. But before he goes through, Steven makes the connection that if Lars is pink and also a portal because he was brought back to life by Rose's tears, then Lion must have gone through the same thing. He considers leaving a note for the others, but goes back first. Once back on Homeworld, Steven gives food to Lars, though Lars reveals he isn't especially hungry despite not having eaten for as long as Steven. The rest of the Off-Colors are shocked about Steven returning with anything, as they were led to believe that the Diamonds destroyed all life on Earth thousands of years ago. But Steven assures them that it's fine on Earth, and people are free to be who they want to be. This convinces the Gems to enter Lars's head so they can go to Earth too, but when Steven struggles to get Lars to enter his own field due to being attached to it, Lars decides that he's going to stay on Homeworld. He's tired of being saved by other people and needing to be saved, so he's staying in order to be worth the life Steven gave him. The Off-Colors decide they'll stay with him so he won't be alone, but they do encourage Steven to leave, as he's the one that the Gems are after. Lars hugs Steven goodbye and Steven leaves, reappearing in the temple just as the other Gems return from searching for him, glad that he's alive. Dewey Wins. Steven is back from Homeworld, but the rest of the Gems are still very concerned about the fact that he was missing for so long. He tries to escort Connie home, but she's upset with him for turning himself in, rather than fighting against Aquamarine or resisting longer. Steven attempts to convince her that surrendering was the right thing to do, but she doesn't hear him out, returning home on Lion instead. The next morning, Steven tells Sadie about what happened to Lars, and she's horrified, which is bad as she was the practice run for telling Lars's parents. On his way to the Barriga house, he sees a mob led by Nanafua Pizza, blaming Dewey for the alien abductions among other things in Beach City, and Steven sends Sadie on ahead while he addresses the issue. He does this by trying to get Mayor Dewey's campaign for re-election back on track, explaining to Beach City that Dewey has nothing to do with the aliens, and he mostly just keeps a low profile. But the people of Beach City say that this is not a good way for a mayor to operate, that it should be his business if the place is under invasion. Steven spends the night prepping for a debate to rehabilitate Mayor Dewey's image after this disastrous press conference, trying to focus on the highlights of what Dewey has done and keeping people calm, and reassuring them things will go back to normal whenever there's a Crystal Gem-related event. But Nanahua's speech concedes that she has been blaming Dewey for too much, and that it's the responsibility of the whole town to band together, rather than blaming the mayor, then waiting for something to happen. Mayor Dewey, well now just Dewey, concedes that the city needs a mayor who does more than scapegoat for problems and drops out of the race, with his campaign manager Steven furious because the guy just gave up. Then Steven realizes that he also just gave up instead of fighting, even if the battle was a losing one. Because trying to fight even when you know you probably can't win is something that you should do for those around you. It's so that they can know that they did everything they could to support you rather than simply watching you throw that support away. Gemcation. Steven is on his phone constantly texting Connie to message him back as he wants to apologize for going off into space before, though after several days, he's yet to get any messages from her. Seeing how stressed Steven is, Greg and the Crystal Gems decide to take him on a vacation to a rental house in the woods so he can unwind, but Steven spends the whole ride there on his phone, still waiting for a reply. Each of the gems in time tries to talk to Steven to ease his stress, with Amethyst trying and failing to start a conversation, Garnet hoping to describe Pink Diamond's reign only to get hushed, and even Pearl attempting to tell Steven the truth, though she doesn't get the chance to do so. Greg has been asking them all to help Steven out, as he assumes that his son is traumatized from his trip to Homeworld, and the gems must be more qualified to talk to him about gem stuff that he doesn't understand. This has always been the tragedy of Greg's character, that he's always depicted as a loving man who cares deeply for Steven, and yet there's only so much that he can do to help out his son, due to the fact that Steven is not only anatomically different from him, but is going to grow up differently, and Greg will never truly be able to understand what the kid needs, no matter how hard he tries. But the tragedy of Steven's character is also brought up here when he tells the gems that he's not struggling to deal with what happened on Homeworld. He's struggling to maintain his relationship with Connie, as he blames himself for the rift between them after promising to do everything together, then leaving without her twice. This is a tragedy as Steven is going through struggles of trying to save the world, and yet he still blames himself for the personal struggles of the people close to him. Last episode, he even tried to make Mayor Dewey's re-election bid his business, despite acknowledging that Dewey and Steven had very little overlap in their responsibilities. Here, he blames himself for the damage to a relationship, despite relationships being something that people have to maintain together. One person cannot do all the work. After admitting this, Greg realizes that this is something he can actually help with, so he talks to Steven about their coping mechanisms. Greg admits that the entire trip is a way to get closer to his son to help both of them with the Homeworld stuff from last season, but then notices that Steven's phone doesn't have a signal out there and he was wasting his time all along. So Steven begs his father to drive him higher up in case Connie has been trying to message him. They make it to a cliff where Steven finally gets a signal, but he still hasn't heard back from her. Giving up on waiting, Steven sits on the roof with his father, joined by the rest of the Crystal Gems. Raising the barn. Steven is still waiting for a response from Connie, only to get a call from Peridot instead. She and Lapis are asking about his trip to Homeworld, wondering if he's okay. Steven mentions the details of his trip, but when he mentions the trial, Lapis freaks out and says they need to leave Earth immediately. Steven rushes to the barn where he sees Lapis preparing to lift the entire building out of the ground. He tries convincing her to stay, but Lapis is convinced that the diamonds are going to come to Earth to seek retribution, so they have to hide. But before she can leave, they realize that Pumpkin is missing, so the trip is postponed as they search for their pet. Steven and Peridot are looking together, walking through the woods as Peridot tries to assure Steven, as well as herself, that things will be fine and they can stay in touch. How exactly she's unsure, as they won't have Wi-Fi in space. She rationalizes leaving alongside Lapis by saying that she's done a lot to make sure that Lapis is comfortable on Earth after everything that's happened. The two return to the barn with no Pumpkin, only to find their pet inside the crops, hiding from the others. Peridot attempts to yank Pumpkin over, but as she tells the plant to leave, she accidentally lets slip that she herself doesn't want to leave Earth, but has to for Lapis's sake. Steven convinces Peridot to tell Lapis how she really feels before she tries to leave again, saying that she's not coming with her on her trip as the two of them ought to stay on Earth because the diamonds might return, and if/when they do, they should fight for their planet. Lapis has had a story arc before about being uncomfortable on Earth, convinced to stay because home's wherever you put effort into making a home. But Lapis doesn't see it that way, or rather, she agrees that they should protect what matters to them, yet what matters to Lapis is the barn and the Meepomorphs and her friends, which is why she wants to take them away, for safety. In spite of Peridot opening her heart about her issues, Lapis leaves, taking the barn with her, so Steven sets up the bathroom for Peridot to live in yet again. He checks his phone, still not having received a message from Connie. When Peridot asks him what they're going to do, he doesn't have a response. Back to kindergarten. Steven still doesn't have the use of his bathroom back after several days of Peridot pouting in there, listening to depressing music and not moving. Having enough of this, Amethyst insists on taking her on a trip to the kindergarten to cheer up, as that's what used to make Amethyst feel better. Once there, she begins to look at all the old gem holes, now recognizing the shapes of a few of them and matching them to the other quartzes she met at the zoo. Peridot, like before, starts correcting her, and for a moment begins to act like her old self. Then they notice a flower growing out of the ground, which indicates that something is capable of growing in that spot after all. And as Peridot has farming experience, they ask her if she would be willing to plant things in the kindergarten to turn it into a regular garden. Over a montage, the three work together as Peridot orders them around, eventually bringing some green back to the valley. The next day, Peridot is eager to check on it again, no longer living in the bathroom. But when they arrive, they see the place once again devoid of life, as the flowers died with no sunlight. Peridot begins to pout that nothing good will ever happen in that place, even returning to the flower from before to smash it for getting her hopes up, when it's revealed to be the bait part of an anglerfish-like corruption. Steven and Amethyst form smoky courts to fight this beast and are able to pretty quickly dispatch it, though Amethyst still isn't happy as she wanted a place to be lively again. They ride the train back home, where Steven points out that there's still plenty of vibrancy in the rest of Earth, and that they shouldn't have tried to pick the least habitable spot in the first place. At this, Peridot cheers up a bit, knowing that it might be best to move on. Of course, this is not an episode about planting flowers in the kindergarten, it's about trying to create something better and to make a home out of your circumstances. Peridot and Lapis's farm at the barn was a representation of the two of them taking control of their new lives on Earth. They didn't simply live there as refugees, they made the place better for living there, and embraced the change as a result. But then all of the work that Peridot put into making the barn into a home went away in an instant as Lapis flew off with it, so of course she would begin to think that anything the gems touch would be permanently unlivable, just like the kindergarten is devoid of all life. Her attempts to fix the place were an attempt to fix herself, and for that to be destroyed too means that she might be incapable of fixing anything. But that's not the case, because sure, the kindergarten might be an unlivable void now, but it's a small part of a much bigger planet. Some things can't be fixed, but some things don't need to be. Sadie Killer. Steven comes into Big Donut with a large order for the cool kids who are having a band practice, where he sees an exhausted Sadie talking to herself as she's been working Lars's shift since he disappeared to space. Steven invites her to watch them practice, though she isn't sure if she can commit to coming by after work. At the practice, Buck reveals that they've got a gig coming up despite not having a name or a song. As they try to come up with the song for their band, they all disagree on the direction, eventually giving up just as Sadie arrives. The next day, they see her coming home from work and decide to bring the practice to her, entering Sadie's house with their instruments and such, and setting up in her bedroom. Here, they discover her horror movie collection and insist on watching one together. The soundtrack of the zombie movie inspires them to start playing along, and soon, Sadie is improvising lyrics for their new song, The Working Dead. These lyrics are fitting, as zombies were originally created as an idea of a person who worked themselves to death, so much that their corpse continued slaving away after their spirit was gone. Happy to have found a beach horror vibe, the band is ready for the gig, but Sadie says she won't be able to make their concert due to having work. The next day, Steven asks her for help with more lyrics, trying to coax her overwhelmed feelings out of her this time with this line of questioning, and having Sadie confess that she never liked her job but doesn't want to stop working because she isn't sure what else she could do. The uncertainty is more terrifying than wasting her life selling donuts. Steven takes some of these depressing lyrics back to the others as they prepare for the show, but as they stop along the way to look for the directions, Sadie catches up, saying she can make not only the show but their practices as well because she quit. Kevin Party. Steven is putting up flyers for his missing lion as he was last seen giving Connie a ride home weeks ago. He encounters Kevin, who's throwing a party Steven's invited to because he wants Stevonnie to make an appearance. Steven turns him down until hearing Connie will be there, then he decides to go in an attempt to see her once again. Steven arrives and quickly sees her, but Kevin tells him he can't simply walk over as he'll come across as desperate. It's better to pretend he's not interested first, so Connie sees how much better his life is without her. Steven goes along with this advice for a time, with Kevin getting increasingly frustrated with the boy as Steven keeps wanting to go over and talk about his feelings, something Kevin says cool kids at cool parties shouldn't do. The two proceed to have fun in every way except talking to Connie. Only once she is alone does Kevin tell Steven to go over, but when he starts talking the way he was instructed to, he ends up offending Connie by acting like everything is fine. But Connie doesn't accept this, revealing that she wanted to talk to Steven in person instead of reuniting over text, but then missing him just barely a few times over the last few episodes. Desperate enough to see Steven, she even accepted an invite to a Kevin party. Steven and Connie finally make up, and Kevin's excited to see Stevonnie as he only wanted them back together so he could hang around someone cool. But then Steven and Connie remain unfused, just happy to be together again, as they portal home on Lion's back. Steven, at Kevin's advice, spends this episode pretending that everything is fine even when it isn't. This only drives a further wedge between the two of them, as their argument was over how nonchalant Steven was acting, despite turning himself in and disappearing into space. By his own admission, he didn't want any of his friends to be taken, and yet allowed them to experience the same loss. Then, once he got back, he acted like everything was fine. In part, this was because Steven was attempting to put on a brave face to calm everyone down, but sometimes, acting stoic and detached hurts others who are not acting that way. They feel panicked over the situation, and to see you unbothered makes their feelings seem invalid. This is combined with the metaphor of Steven spending the party playing hard to get around Connie, like he doesn't even want to talk to her after so long apart. The truth is that playing hard to get only makes you hard to want, and a person who respects your feelings will only let you go if you act like that's what you want. In the end, it's opening up emotionally that gets Steven and Connie back together because being jam buddies and talking to one another is how they got together in the first place. Lars of the Stars. Steven and Connie have obtained a gift from Lars's parents to bring to him as they check up on the guy, taking Lion's mane into space and wondering if he's okay. They quickly find out he is, as they appear not in a cave underground like they were expecting, but inside of a spaceship, the Sun Incinerator, in the midst of a battle between Lars and the Off-Colors versus Emerald. As it turns out, Lars has been doing great since he was left on Homeworld, taking advantage of the fact that he's invisible to gem scanners to evade capture and steal his way through several sectors of space. Steven and Connie drop off the care package from Beach City, where Lars begins to feel sentimental about all the gifts given to him, until he sees a few pictures of Sadie Killers and her new band. Lars grows upset about seeing Sadie move on with her life, mad that she didn't wait around for him to return, and that she seems to be better off with the change. This anger causes Lars to freeze up just as Emerald's ship catches up to his. The Off-Colors await an order, but Lars doesn't give one, until Steven and Connie fuse into Stevonnie and begin explaining to him that he ought to be happy that Sadie is moving on, as before quitting her old job, she was miserable and depressed. The previous episode had Kevin posit that pretending to have moved on from a person will make them want you more, and this episode shows what happens when that sort of thing is actually believed. The person you moved on from feels less valuable, like you never cared in the first place. But people do move on from lost relationships no matter what, and we often only see the end destination instead of the entire journey. Lars never saw how hard it was for Sadie to recover, just that she has. Lars gets out of his funk and orders the ship to stop, comparing Stevonnie to Lars and Sadie, to Emerald and a Sun Incinerator, then calling her bluff she won't actually destroy her own ship. The engines are grazed though, and Lars says he'll have to take his personal ship to destroy Emerald's weapons before they recharge. But Stefani offers to take flight instead so Lars can stay in command, flying out and taking out their target, though getting shot down in the process. The episode ends on the two falling towards a nearby planet. Jungle Moon. Stefani crash lands the damaged ship on a jungle planet, surviving by bracing the blow with the shield. As the ship's console is too damaged to contact the main ship, Stefani has to survive on this planet for as long as they can, something they learn's only possible after being attacked by life down there. After a few nights, they come across an abandoned spire that they head towards, getting chased inside by a bird-like alien and then using it for shelter for the night. Stefani falls asleep and wakes up Tiny, inside of Connie's house. They see a giant Miss Maheshwaran on her phone, ordering fleets of ships around while paying no attention to them until they climb up and grab the phone. When she finally looks at the two, they see that her pupils are those of Yellow Diamond, and so the dream shifts to the Spire's past, where they're in the midst of an invasion. Stefani keeps pestering Yellow Diamond for a fleet of her own, then a ship, then a colony, before Yellow dismisses her. As she walks off in anger, they see their own reflection is that of Pink Diamond. Stefani awakens back inside the Spire, going to the top and activating the computer using the passcode from their dream. This alerts Lars' ship, and he reroutes course to pick up his friend, even blasting away the creature from before and making up for saving his life before. I'll put off talking about this one until later for reasons people who have seen the show and know what's going on will understand. Your Mother and Mine. Lars' ship has damaged thrusters and they're stranded as they wait for repairs. So to pass the time, Steven decides to introduce the off-colors to Garnet as she is the leader of the Crystal Gems. She passes through Lars' head and appears in the ship full of mismatched gems, immediately complimenting everyone on how unique they are. But the off-colors aren't flattered by these observations, assuming that Garnet is only pointing out their inconsistencies in order to make fun of them. As they explain, these are the things that have caused their lives to be so hard on Homeworld. It's hard to take pride in something when it's caused you so much harm. Garnet tries to explain that, on Earth, differences are celebrated, just like Rose Quartz taught them. And this only scares the off-colors further as they've been taught not only to hate themselves, but to fear Rose Quartz or anyone else who would try to convince them to accept them for who they are. Garnet decides to explain the history of Rose's rebellion as she realizes that the version they've been taught is the propagandized version that the Diamonds have manipulated. Earth was once selected as a colony to be owned by Pink Diamond, with every gem made on the colony grown to serve her directly. But Rose Quartz, despite being a regular quartz soldier, began to notice the organic life on Earth and fell in love with the environment there. She pointed out the animals living there to Pink Diamond, saying that they ought to stop mining the planet to allow that life to thrive. But when the Diamonds rejected this offer, Rose decided to begin a rebellion by recruiting all the servile and misshapen gems to her side. Pink Diamond called upon Blue and Yellow for aid in this rebellion, and the war dragged on, eventually forcing Rose to shatter Pink Diamond to end the war more quickly. But the story doesn't end there. As retaliation for shattering Pink Diamond, the other three Diamonds used a powerful attack to corrupt every gem on Earth to make it uninhabitable, with only a few surviving thanks to Rose Quartz's shield. The off-colors are now depressed as the story didn't actually have a happy ending. The villain whose defeat they used to celebrate was actually good, but is now dead. But Garnet points out the real point of the story. The biggest lie they were told by the Diamonds was not that Rose was defective, but that the battle was over, and there was no one left to fight against. Since Garnet is living proof otherwise, this means there is still something to fight for. Reinvigorated, the off-colors and Lars begin to repair the damage to the ship, managing to get power back online, though they still have to repair the thrusters. So to do this, they go to a nearby asteroid mine, knowing the dangers but accepting the risk. At the end of the episode, Steven also talks to Garnet in private about the dream he had of Pink Diamond back when he was on the Jungle Moon. His fear is that somehow Pink Diamond is still alive in some way, though Garnet assures him that she's not, unaware how accurate her statement really is. The Big Show. Steven is recording the early days of the band Sadie Killer and the Suspects using his dad's old camcorder, talking to them as they wrap up a rehearsal just in time for Barb to get home and talk excitedly about her daughter being in a band. But Sadie says they had an agreement that her mother would not involve herself in her daughter's hobbies anymore due to how obsessive she can be, so Barb leaves. Steven then shows the recording to Greg, who likes the sound so much that he's reminded of his early days as a traveling musician. After seeing them play live, he gets the idea in his head to fund a tour for them, calling up an old music industry contact and scoring them a gig in Empire City. Barb sees them packing for this trip and offers to come with them, but Sadie once again tells her off for forcing her way into her life. As they're setting up for the concert, Sadie sees a woman in a gaudy makeup and an oversized outfit, assuming it's her mother come to watch in disguise, and then growing angry because her mom ignored their agreement. During the performance of their new song, Ghost, Sadie repeatedly confronts this woman with the lyrics about disappearance. Backstage, this woman visits, revealed not as Sadie's mom, but Greg's contact in the industry. Sadie realizes that she's actually disappointed her mother didn't come to see the show, as she realizes once again that this sort of affection is just how her mom shows her love. Pool hopping. Steven is looking down at Beach City, observing how different it is with a new mayor, with Sadie leaving, and Lars up in space. He wishes he could get a donut like before when he realizes that Big Donut is somehow still open, and Garnet's working there. She says she got a job at Big Donut as it was the least likely thing for her to do. Her future vision only works on likely outcomes rather than small niche events. By behaving randomly, she's able to look into less likely futures. Steven thinks that this sounds cool and decides to go with her, with the two of them going out to behave erratically, though probably. Ordering 20 pizzas, then giving them away, with the final one going to Vidalia's house as her son Onion is still missing. Except Onion's home. Garnet simply didn't realize that he was back, as she was looking at a different timeline. When they arrive, they see Vidalia painting more pictures, offering to be her muse for a time before seeing a one-eyed kitten picking through the garbage. They follow this cat into a clearing where they find several more, and Garnet finally breaks down because they're in such uncharted territory she cannot predict what's going to happen next. She says that it's been like this for a while, that Steven's actions are so unlikely that she is unsure about anything going on with the Homeworld gyms and such. Steven tells her that life isn't about trying to guess the future, but rather picking a future you want and trying to make that real, and he shelters the kittens despite that being a likely outcome of finding them. Steven and Garnet find a foster program for these cats, with Garnet adopting the one-eyed one herself, naming him Cat Steven, as Vidalia unveils her finished piece of the two of them together. The entire reason Garnet exists is because Sapphire was infatuated by Ruby's unpredictable behavior, the love she felt causing her to act in erratic ways that nobody on Homeworld had seen before to create something new and better. Garnet feels the same way about Steven, that he is a new kind of gym whose behavior is unlike any gym before him, and that following him around is creating a constant stream of new experiences. This was partially the reason why Rose Quartz wanted so badly to make Steven in the first place, not just to make something new, but out of love. There is a constant connection between the love Rose Quartz had for Earth and the rebellion against the rigid society of the gyms that she fought to get rid of. There's a connection between the love of Ruby and Sapphire making something unknown and new. There's a connection between the love of the kittens Steven and Garnet found and their desire to have done something unusual to find them. And yet for all of the illogical behavior that had to be done in order to create all these sources of love, despite how unlikely they were, there's still one very logical and predictable thing that kept all of them going: the love itself. Because while love might be unpredictable, the reaction to it is simple. You want to do things to help each other. You don't have to have future vision to predict that. Letters to Lars. While floating through space, Lars has a letter pop out of his head from Steven. He begins to read about how the people of Beach City have been getting along since he left. Mayor Nanafwa has rallied the people together in an emergency preparedness plan in case the Homeworld gyms return, having the local restaurant owners stockpiling emergency rations, Greg and Ronaldo looking out through a newly purchased telescope, and the Pizza Family plus Pearl sending out emergency alerts if needed. Everybody has a role in this plan except Dewey, who complains loudly of this. Sadie and her band are working on their music when Dewey crashes a rehearsal looking for some way to contribute. He also crashes an improv show hosted by Jamie during an argument over Amethyst shapeshifting into the objects they're pretending to use that Peridot doesn't see the issue with. Dewey also attempts to play tennis with Garnet and Greg, though Garnet's slow shots are too much for either of them to handle. The pro wrestling ring is back in action, and Steven gives Lars a few updates on that, before closing with the fact that PD now has his own tater tot food truck, the Dewey Mobile, that's been painted over. Steven sees a dejected Dewey walking along the street after all his attempts to fit in have failed, flagging him down and asking about what's wrong. Dewey says that the town has changed to the point of no longer needing a guy like him around, and that he doesn't have a place in Beach City. But Steven points out that Big Donut needs employees, and in the end, Dewey has a new job selling donuts, even renaming most of the products after himself, except for one which he calls the Pink Lars. Can't go back. Steven is woken up in the middle of the night by Ronaldo, who's shocked because he has discovered a moon base with Greg's telescope. Steven tries to tell him it's just the spire they've been to before, until Ronaldo mentions that the moon base is barn-shaped. Realizing that the moon is where Lapis took the barn, he takes Lion up there to see for himself. Steven doesn't find Lapis inside the barn, but does see her in the spire, sitting in a room that's projecting various scenes from Earth inside of it. Lapis is looking at Beach City and the surrounding area, telling Steven that she wasn't able to make it very far from Earth because she missed her home too much. She was distracted by looking back that she couldn't go forward. She sings the song, That Distant Shore, about how she finally felt comfortable surrounded by her friends, and that was what truly made her feel as though she belonged somewhere. Except her fear over the return of the diamonds caused her to destroy that friendship, the real reason she thinks she can never go home. Lapis's story is one about trauma. She's been trying to adapt to her new life, but the old one always catches up to her. This isn't so much the people she surrounds herself with, as they've proven that they can change, but the memories she has of being trapped and victimized for most of her existence. It's not Lapis Lazuli's past that's hurting her, it's herself, and because she feels as though it's her own mind that's broken, she keeps ruining the things that could be good about her future by bringing these thoughts into them. So Lapis's own worst enemy is herself, and all her attempts to heal are prevented by the fact that she doesn't think she's capable of healing. Lapis is only free from the mirror and the oppression of the diamonds physically. In her head, she's still stuck. Steven does convince Lapis to return to Earth, even if it will be awkward, as her friends will still be there for her when she does. Since Steven was woken up in the middle of the night, he falls asleep inside the spire, and then dreams of a few scenes of Pink Diamond being scolded by the others for not dealing with the rebellion properly. This vision ends with the silhouette of Pearl, the Pearl he knows, wielding Rose's sword and approaching before Steven wakes up. When he mentions the diamond dream to Lapis, she panics again and flies away in spite of Steven pleading with her things will be okay. Steven gets up and decides it's time to confront Pearl about this vision. A single pale rose. Steven confronts Pearl about whether she was the one to have shattered Pink Diamond, and Pearl freezes up, using her phone's lack of a case as an excuse to avoid talking about it. Steven then gets a text from her about wanting to tell him the truth, but Pearl says she can't recall sending this because her phone has gone missing inside of her gym. So she has Steven go inside her gym in order to get the cell phone, meeting an inner Pearl in charge of organizing the objects that Surface Pearl conjures from her head. This inner Pearl cannot find the cell phone either, but she has the same idea as before, to send Steven inside of her own gym so he can retrieve the cell phone from the others. He enters an earlier memory of the temple, where he sees Pearl crying over Rose's decision to have a baby, realizing he has to go back further and asking this Pearl to help look for the phone. Deeper down, he sees a Pearl lamenting the destruction following the end of the gym war that they thought they had won because the Homeworld gyms were evacuating. Then he jumps back to the moment where Rose shattered Pink Diamond, but when Steven screams in fear from seeing this, Rose turns to face him, revealing she is a shape-shifted Pearl, whose gym he enters once more. Steven finally comes into an overheard conversation between Rose Quartz and her Pearl inside the palanquin. Pearl is hesitant to follow a particular order, but Rose insists that she go through with it because she's incapable of shattering herself. Rose Quartz shapeshifts into her true form as Pink Diamond, and Pearl takes on the form of Rose, acting out the scene they planned with fake shards planted at the site of Pink Diamond's supposed shattering, actually the diamond faking her own death to end the rebellion. Rose Quartz was an assumed identity all along. Steven texts Pearl to say that he found her phone, exiting her gym as Pearl reveals that her final order from Pink Diamond was to never speak of that moment again. But she didn't speak of the moment, she simply asked Steven to retrieve a phone from her memories. He laments that his mother was Pink Diamond all along, which Amethyst is shocked to overhear. For those who watched the original part 1 of this video before I abridged it, you've likely already heard me misspeak this episode's twist before. I accidentally called Rose Quartz Pink Diamond once or twice. This is one of those huge spoilers, like Garnet being a fusion, that is well known enough that people who haven't seen Steven Universe already know about it. So for the last several seasons, I've been speaking about Rose and Pink as though they were two different people, and describing episode plots as though that wasn't something I already knew. But I don't think that this detracts from the reveal at all. A good plot twist is something that makes the show more rewatchable. Having a short surprise for the audience might get people talking, but they won't talk for long unless this twist recontextualizes a lot about what preceded it. Rose Quartz being Pink Diamond is one of those things that gives context to earlier flashbacks and instances where Homeworld gems bring up the past. It also adds a thematic irony to the fact that Rose defeated Pink, in the sense that yes, Rose Quartz took the place of Pink Diamond, and Pink Diamond no longer exists because of her. It was less of a shattering and more of a transformation, but the same language can nonetheless apply. Now we're only falling apart. Amethyst is trying to deal with the new knowledge that Rose Quartz was actually a disguised Pink Diamond, but Garnet is handling the information much worse, even defusing, as Sapphire gets angry over the fact that her entire life as a fusion was based on a lie from a diamond. This is made worse by the fact that Sapphire never used her powers to look into Rose herself out of respect that she feels was betrayed. Sapphire runs to Rose's fountain, with Steven and Pearl following her to the now snowy area. Pearl was under orders never to reveal the secret, but because it's now known about, she can explain the entire story, which she does, hoping it'll cheer up Sapphire. Pink Diamond had begged and pleaded to get her own colony and was assigned Earth. Excited at first, but quickly growing bored when she realized that watching the planet slowly be unmade from space was not interesting. She asks Pearl to project an image, literally imaginate, of Pink Diamond down on Earth with the newly minted Quartz soldiers. As Pink Diamond thinks that this looks like fun, she changes form and goes down, blending in for a bit before being held back by Pearl so they don't get found out. Pink then goes to the rest of the planet to personally observe what's going to become her new soldiers, only to see fields of plants and even early human life, where she realizes that she isn't creating new life, but destroying the old one. Sapphire's upset about learning this, that the entire rebellion and their whole lives as crystal gems was based on a diamond being bored and messing around, and she drew them into a fight rather than just stopping the destruction herself. But Pearl mentions that Pink Diamond tried to stop the Earth from being destroyed only to be told off by the others. They gave her the human zoo to try to appease her obsession with humans, but Pink Diamond decided to take matters into her own hands by leading an open rebellion against the others. This was originally just meant to scare the diamonds away from Earth until the day where she met Garnet, and was quickly obsessed with the newly discovered idea that fusions between different types of gems was possible. Pearl and Rose briefly try to fuse but don't hold the form for long before discovering Garnet and taking her in. Sapphire cheers up, learning that Rose's rebellion was actually shaped by her fusion instead of the other way around. I've mentioned before that a good society is one that tries to make itself a welcoming place for everybody, and this is proof of Rose Quartz's commitment to the idea. She had no idea that fusions like Garnet could exist, but rather than trying to get her to unfuse and join in a more familiar form, she changed the way she thought to allow for more fusions in the future. Society should serve the people in it, not the other way around. They return to the temple in a better mood, only to find it empty with a letter from Ruby. What's your problem? Pearl, Sapphire, and Steven return to a note from Ruby saying that she's run away, and Sapphire breaks into tears at not having her other half, with Pearl comforting her. Amethyst tries to convince Steven not to bother searching and to play video games with her instead, but Steven leaves anyway, and Amethyst follows. As they're walking the beach, Amethyst keeps doing bits and shapeshifting into various gag sizes, with Steven upset that she's not taking this search more seriously. Eventually, they stop for pizza at Fish Stew, where she attempts to get Steven to open up about the discovery that his mom was a diamond, and that technically he is too. But Steven says he hasn't really thought about that yet, as he's too busy helping other people, and this is the problem that Amethyst says she has found. Steven should be processing his own feelings instead of constantly trying to micromanage everyone else's emotions. He's just learned a ton of new information, but won't even let himself think about it, bottling up the feelings through selfless acts, but hurting himself in the end. Amethyst, too, says that none of the rose quartz pink diamond stuff is her problem because she wasn't even born until after it happened, and yet she still ends up dealing with the fallout of the event in spite of it not being her fault. She compares herself to Steven, who's trying to make it his business, and compares his refusal to allow others to process their emotions to the fact that he's denying his own. They overhear the pizza twins discussing Greg and a big tip he left after ordering for Ruby, and they head out to help her. But Steven keeps trying to stop Amethyst from flying because he wants to know how she feels about the entire situation. Amethyst, upset that Steven hasn't really realized the lesson that she's trying to teach, attempts to shake him off so Steven will be alone with his thoughts, but he hangs on and eventually causes a crash near the water tower. They land on the beach where Amethyst finally says the truth about how she feels. It doesn't matter. Sure, she has complex thoughts about it and needs some time and space to vent, but taking out thousands of years of traumatic experiences and expecting a child to do the emotional labor for her would be irresponsible. Sometimes people need to be responsible for their own emotional baggage instead of forcing it onto others. Steven admits that Amethyst has become the most mature of the crystal gems, and the two head to the cliff because they both want to meet up with Greg and Ruby. The question. Steven and Amethyst find Ruby with Greg, the two of them having talked it all out. According to Ruby, she's totally fine without Sapphire now, even finding new hobbies she can enjoy without wondering if Sapphire would like it too. One of these hobbies is reading comics, specifically one about a lonesome cowboy, and she decides that her journey of self-discovery should involve the open plains. So they head into a field in the middle of nowhere, where Ruby gets to act out this Ruby Rider fantasy, being dependent on no one but herself and getting into trouble. She enjoys not knowing what's about to happen without Sapphire's predictions. After a montage and a song, Steven is impressed at how well she is taken to being alone, until Ruby admits that the entire time she was singing, she was thinking about Sapphire and how she would feel in the open plains with her. No matter how much independence she has, she still wants to go back to the way things were, but she's also aware that, after what they've learned, it would be dishonest to do so, and it was Rose's dishonesty that made them break apart in the first place. Ruby's arc in this episode is all about finding independence in solitude, or at least as much solitude as she can get when her horse is Amethyst. She's no longer a part of Garnet after learning that the main reason she was a part of Garnet was something made under false pretenses. Her relationship with Rose was a big part of who she was, and that part's no longer there. So she wants to rebuild what she had before, but can't rebuild it the same way it was before, but she doesn't know if rebuilding it in a new form would be as good as what they had. Steven finally proposes a solution: to propose. It's a human tradition, but so is so much else of what the crystal gems have been adopting lately. This way, the two can still be together in a less literal way. Both gems will still enjoy their independence, while also acknowledging that they can be together. Because you can't truly love another person or another gem if you don't love yourself first. Maid of Honor. The crystal gems are planning the wedding between Sapphire and Ruby, though when Sapphire sees how few invitations there are, she feels bad about the number of gems who didn't survive the war. So Steven, to cheer her up, tries to come up with other people to invite, and decides to unbubble Bismuth to increase attendance. As soon as Bismuth is freed, she freaks out at the sight of all the other bubbles in the room, wondering if Rose didn't just bubble everyone she disagreed with. It's not until freeing one of the gems and seeing the corruption on it that Bismuth realizes what actually happened. Steven then sits her down to explain the newly learned history of rose quartz and pink diamond, and after a bit of venting, Bismuth is surprisingly okay with it. She's even able to appreciate the irony of suggesting shattering pink diamond as a way to end the war, not realizing that that is exactly what happened. Steven is preparing to unveil Bismuth at the wedding after a speech, hoping that this will be the first step in repairing the relationship between Bismuth and the others. but Bismuth runs away back to the forge, believing herself to be unworthy of joining as she tried to shatter Steven the last time she was freed. Bismuth also points out how illogical it is that the crystal gems are together at all, that the entire reason they were founded was revealed as a ruse, so there's no reason for the few remaining gems to bother sticking together. But Steven insists that she join anyway, not because of nostalgia, but because he wants her to join. Sure, the label of crystal gem might be an antiquated term, but as it's the best descriptor of who they currently are, there's no reason that the term can't be repurposed into something new. Bismuth and Steven return to the temple, where the others are all waiting, and rather than disgust, they are happy to see their old friend is now their new friend. Bismuth unveils a wedding present of 2 rings for the brides-to-be. Reunited. Steven is singing as he preps everything for the wedding, the song going through all the insecurities of the various gems in attendance, as he assures them it's better to focus on a wedding instead of worrying about the Homeworld diamonds and such. Most of the characters have had some life-changing circumstances, but Steven's hoping that the wedding will be good for morale. The ceremony begins with Ruby and Sapphire exchanging vows, talking about the improvements the other half has made to their lives, and finally kissing to emerge as Garnet. One of the fun facts I learned about this show prior to ever watching it is that the creators found it important to make sure Ruby was in a dress for the wedding, as a few foreign dubs had changed her gender so as to avoid portraying a same-sex relationship. During the reception, a few of the townies mingle with the crystal gems, something that honestly should have happened a lot more in the series. I know this is sort of a break from the usual way that I format these videos, but a major complaint that I have about the series thus far is that the first season set up an entire dynamic about the crystal gems not really caring about the people of Earth while still trying to protect them, as if to say that as they grew and matured as people, they would be expected to slowly start to learn more about those who they were supposed to care about, then learn why Rose was so intent on protecting Earth. But Steven's tears of joy turn to tears of blue diamond, as Garnet predicts her appearance, and soon, 2 giant arms are in the sky bearing down on Earth. Nanafua enacts the plan for evacuation, though the diamonds aren't there to fight, but to extract the cluster for themselves. Steven attempts to dream to warn the cluster of this, but is too late as the bubble pops and smoky fusions begin to emerge from under the ground. Thankfully, this newly fused giant arm isn't servile to the diamonds, but attacks them instead, signaling to the others it's on their side. As the cluster wrestles with Yellow Diamond's arm, Blue Diamond lands on the beach to fight with the others, stopping a fusion of Alexandrite with her sad powers. As this power only affects gems, Connie is still safe, charging at Blue Diamond, but getting stopped by the matriarch, who is furious they're still wielding the sword that shattered someone she cared about. Garnet, however, has experience with holding herself together, and she approaches Blue Diamond to tell her she cannot stop her love again. This is just a distraction, though, meant to distract her long enough to allow for Lapis's return as she drops the barn on Diamond. Peridot's excited to see her old friends returned, with Lapis finally accepting she would rather be shattered as a crystal gem than live in hiding forever. Bismuth throws Perry at Blue Diamond's head as the rest continue their assault. Meanwhile, the cluster has managed to overpower Yellow Diamond's ship, tossing it at Blue Diamond and knocking them both into the water, smashing the house in front of the temple in the process. Yellow Diamond survives this, freeing Blue from the wreckage as they stare the others down. Peridot uses the opportunity to tell off Yellow Diamond to her face, much like she did a few seasons ago, but Yellow doesn't even remember who she is and poofs her with some lightning. Then when Steven rushes to her aid, she poofs him too. Steven wakes up to see Connie over his body, which he's now separate from, as he's in a room with the physical forms of the other gems being projected over their gems, with Lapis and Peridot being poofed and thus in gem form. Steven is able to faintly communicate with Connie while his ghost passes through her, giving her a few words of encouragement before floating to the other diamonds to talk things out with them. Once again, this has always been Steven's preferred method of solving problems. Even after the diamonds arrived, he attempted to talk to them first, and only fought when Blue Diamond wouldn't listen. He encourages the others to keep going, only to be warded off by a psychic shield the diamonds have that takes a few attempts to get through. Blue Diamond is the first to hear him call out, with Yellow calming down afterwards as they realize the voice they're hearing must belong to Pink Diamond. With the shield down, Steven is finally able to show them that he is Pink Diamond, and that the one they've been mourning was never dead, only dead to them. He returns to his body to the sight of the others crying over him, the diamonds included. Legs from here to Homeworld. Blue and Yellow Diamond are happy to finally be reunited with Pink, even if they are a bit confused about what exactly a Steven is or why she looks like that. They do learn that he's got none of his mother's memories, though Yellow's sure that the memories are in there somewhere, something mostly confirmed by the multiple dream flashbacks Steven has had before. Blue's surprised that any gem survived their attack on Earth all those years ago, and then the crystal gems have to tell the diamonds that, while the gems on Earth survived, most of them did so as corruptions. The diamonds are escorted to the crashed gem ship where the centipedals have been living for a few months, to show them a corrupted gem in its new habitat. Yellow Diamond attempts to undo the corruption, and manages to partially fix Nephrite with the help of Blue and Steven, the now-healed gem excited to see the diamonds and speaking as though she has no memories of the events since the end of the war. When the diamonds let go of her, she reverts to a centipedal, meaning their combined powers were not enough to fix her. The metaphor here is clear. The three diamonds using their combined powers to wipe out gem life on Earth was an impulsive thing done shortly after learning that Pink Diamond was shattered. But the process of fixing a corrupted gem is slow and requires a lot more effort. So destroying something is much easier and faster than fixing a mistake. As they'll need White Diamond to fully undo all the damage, they agree to meet with her, but since the arms are damaged, they need to take Pink's ship back to Homeworld. Pink's ship is found near the junkyard from Lion 4, which I called as being the two mountains on either side of the door, and they return with this ship to Beach City, where everyone starts to say their goodbyes to the residents there. Bismuth stays behind to watch over the gems of Lapis and Peridot, warning Steven not to walk into a trap. They leave, with Yellow and Blue Diamond fearful of coming back in Pink's Diamond ship, as they're worried it'll make everything that's happened over the last 6,000 years look like a waste of time. The legs land to the sight of tons of gathered gems celebrating their return, which temporarily makes Steven think things are going to be okay, until White Pearl approaches, asking for Pink and Pink alone, bubbling them back to White Diamond. White Diamond is thrilled to see Steven, though she never lets him speak and talks down to him, like everything that's happened involving faking her death was just a little bit of fun that she has now gotten out of her system. She then teleports Steven to a tower full of bubble gems before the episode ends. Familiar. Steven is in Pink Diamond's room, lamenting that he wasn't able to hold White Diamond's attention for long. While lamenting he doesn't have a bed appears, just like Rose's room, although these objects seem to be made by a bunch of tiny pebbles who live under the floors and in the walls of Pink Diamond's room. Steven tries talking to them, thanking them for their work, and they celebrate that Pink Diamond is finally back. Pearl then enters to drop off Steven's things, upset that she's considered one of them, so she can prepare Steven for a meeting that Yellow Diamond has requested. He repeats his worries to her, though Yellow Diamond points out that being able to talk at all around White is more than she was actually expecting. Yellow herself hasn't even been able to meet with White in millennia, despite having multiple successful colonies, but when Steven suggests that she make an unsuccessful one, Yellow laughs, happy to have Pink Diamond's sense of humor back. Next, Steven is taken to a meeting with Blue Diamond, who's equally happy to see who she considers Pink Diamond. As Blue laments that White Diamond hasn't met with anyone since the end of Era 1, when Pink left them, Steven wonders if they realize he's a different person entirely, and not just a new form of Pink Diamond. After a bit of talk about games they used to play that Steven doesn't remember, she leaves as she has business to attend to elsewhere. Steven is sad that no one is giving him much attention, and yet he also has a weird suspicion that everything he's doing is familiar. As he sings a song about this, he slowly realizes why. Back in the early seasons, the crystal gems wouldn't take him along on missions because they didn't think he was ready. Here, the diamonds aren't taking Steven along on their business, as they don't think he's ready for that sort of thing either. So to get them to pay attention, Steven prepares to do the thing his mother used to do and throw a big party for everyone, and then they'll have to pay attention. He gets into Pink Diamond's old outfit as Pearl smuggles in the rest of his friends, where Steven explains his plan to end Diamond's reign of terror with fun. Together, alone. Steven is preparing for the party only to begin coughing up locks of his mother's hair before being brought before White Diamond and waking up from the nightmare. He's worried about the upcoming party he has to throw, but does feel a little bit better about all his friends being present as they've settled into Pink Diamond's room. The proper preparations for the party begin after Steven explains his plan to talk to White Diamond and convince her to return to Earth to undo the corruption. Steven begins listing off the things he wants to have, only for the Homeworld gems to tell him all of these are unprecedented and thus forbidden. Steven tries to justify the additions as fun, but the Homeworld gems have no concept of fun, even in spite of Steven pointing out a few hobbies that they have. Not even his friends are going to be allowed to visit unless they enter in specific formations alongside those that belong together, even demanding Garnet split up so Ruby and Sapphire can enter with their own kind. The party begins, which has been whittled down to Steven sitting on Pink Diamond's throne and thanking people for announcing their arrivals to the party before standing at attention. He breaks with protocol a bit to greet Amethyst and such, with her showing off a few tricks she can do with the limb enhancers she's required to wear. Then, Yellow Diamond and Blue Diamond make their entrances to the event, telling Steven that he's doing fine because everything is so orderly. Finally, it's time for White's Pearl to announce that she will not be attending because she has other business, with this Pearl sitting atop her throne in her place to observe the party. Everybody dances slowly and robotically, pleasing White's Pearl, until Connie arrives and asks Steven to dance. He's unsure about doing this because it might displease White Diamond, but since White Diamond isn't there, he agrees to dance anyway. Connie and Steven fuse into Stevani, which ruins the party as Yellow demands to know why they have done such a thing. The rest of the crystal gems fuse together to defend him, but they get poofed for doing this, save for Stevani, who's thrown into a cell to think about what they've done. Escapism. Stevani is inside of a cell in the gem Homeworld, a punishment for fusing. They try a few things to get out, but ultimately fail at all of these, defusing after falling to the floor. Steven is upset that their mission to Homeworld was a failure of diplomacy, and he regrets getting everyone poofed. But Connie encourages him to keep trying and call for help. Steven remembers that this is an option via his dream powers and takes a nap. He wakes up on Watermelon Island, now split in two, frustrated because he wanted to contact Bismuth instead. Steven enters a village dedicated to worshipping his sacrificial pose from before, attempting to communicate that he needs to get back to the mainland, but failing to convince anybody. Swimming there is no easier, so he decides to build a raft, only to be found by another tribe of Stevens from the other half who are more militaristic, in memory of the Steven who led them in a fight against Malachite. The Stevens fight over him for a bit in a war decided by painting patterns on one another, but the main Steven leaves to finish up his raft. When the others see what he's doing, they eventually put aside their differences to aid in a higher purpose, soon finishing the raft and waving goodbye to Steven as he goes off to sea. The journey is difficult and he's nearly sunk by a watermelon shark, but he does make it to Lion without a few limbs. Watermelon Steven is then brought before Greg and Bismuth, who he tells about the plea for help before collapsing. Steven wakes up, back in his body on Homeworld, as he hopes that what he did was enough. Change your mind. Steven wakes up still in the tower, being scolded by Blue Diamond for bringing her pebbles into the ballroom and making a mess of things. She looks down to see the body of Pink Diamond before waking up from the memory to a very similar scene, being scolded by Blue Diamond for fusing during the party. When Connie stands up for him, saying it was her idea to dance together, Blue Diamond attacks Steven, which causes him to realize that this is far from the first time he's been locked away in the tower for acting like himself. Pink Diamond was punished in this way plenty of times. He points this out to Blue Diamond, shutting down her argument that this is for her own good by saying that if she really cares about someone, she wouldn't agree to punish them like this. This is connected to the fact that Pink Diamond fled to her own colony and started Rose's rebellion. Of course she would want to run away from an oppressive situation. Pink never let down Homeworld, Homeworld let down Pink. With this change of heart, Blue Diamond breaks Connie and Steven out to go find the rest of the bubbled crystal gems, but they're greeted by Yellow Diamond who stands in the way. Yellow won't hear out Blue's pleas to spare the others, and the two diamonds proceed to fight one another, with Steven grabbing the gems as they're distracted. Yellow is about to poof Blue when Steven jumps in the way, saying that if every pork chop were perfect, we wouldn't have hot dogs. Then he explains this metaphor to mean that a perfect society like the one that Yellow has done so many horrible things to enforce is one that eliminates the things they love about their world, like Pink Diamond. Given this new context, it's understandable why Rose would have chosen that message specifically to be a passphrase for her canons so long ago. She prefers to have the mistakes and off-color aspects of the world around, as that's what she considers to be the things that make life worth living. Yellow has a change of heart and agrees to escort Steven and the others to the Pink Leg ship, but they're stopped by White's Pearl before they can make it there. She tells them they've misbehaved and flies into the White Head, floating into the air to activate the mech, which combines with the leg ship to form an armless mech. Then the two arms from Earth return, punching out the giant mecha and knocking it down. These are revealed to be piloted by Bismuth and Lapis/Peridot, who heard Steven's cry for help and came down to rescue the crystal gems just in time. They turn these ships over to the other diamonds who, with Steven's combined powers, take over the main mech and attempt to communicate with White Diamond through her limbs. Once they have White semi-captive, they attempt to explain what Steven's taught them, that a society that values purity and perfection cannot exist as it will consume itself with conformity instead of adapting to grow and meet new challenges. The high standards of Gem society are causing more harm than they're helping anyone. White refuses to listen to this and blasts them with I-beams that turn the other diamonds perfect, meaning without color. Steven and the others flee from her, with Steven dropping the gems as he falls down to the surface of Homeworld. He chases the falling rocks down to stop them from being cracked, managing to pull the others out of their gem forms by fusing with them one by one, first as Smoky Quartz, then as Rainbow Quartz 2.0. They land safely, with Steven able to get Ruby and Sapphire out of their gems by fusing into a new form, one strong enough to survive a direct hit from the Diamond Mech's heel, Sunstone. Sunstone tells the others that the key to victory still involves speaking to White Diamond directly, and that they need to climb up to reach her. As Sunstone can't do this alone, they decide to fuse with the rest of the crystal gems at once to form Obsidian, the shape of the temple itself. As they're climbing, the rest of the unfused gems work to distract White's arms to clear the way for the others. Despite Connie getting a new sword from Bismuth for this purpose, they're still all knocked away, save for Obsidian herself, meaning the mission was a success. The crystal gems enter White Diamond's eye, entering her head where they see everyone in the same pose, speaking in unison. White begins to rant about the flaws of the other diamonds, that Yellow's loyalty to Homeworld wavers when Blue's nearby, and how Blue cares too much for others to do her duties. She points out that now they don't have flaws anymore, like caring too much. She says that Pink Diamond and her friends have flaws too, that they're too funny, and to stop this, she begins zapping the other crystal gems to cure them of their insecurities and dependences and obsessions. White Diamond then repeats one of Jasper's criticisms from a few seasons back, that Pink Diamond's personality brings out the worst in everyone she's exposed to. She criticizes her for doing this on purpose, that Pink wants to be the best of the worst and drags down others to feel better about herself. But Steven says that it can't be true because that's how his mom was, not him. White calls her a liar, so good at lying she's lied to herself. Then, she attempts to turn Pink Diamond back to her old form by removing the diamond from Steven, pulling it out and making Steven defuse. This Pink Diamond then shapeshifts a few times, taking on several different forms before finally appearing in the true form of Pink Diamond. Steven Universe. White tries to correct what she views as a flaw, but the Diamond Steven rejects the changes, blocking them no matter how much White Diamond fires at him. Human Steven and the emotionless Diamond Steven meet up, with Steven wrapping his arms around himself and smiling as they hug and dance. Diamond Steven smiling and laughing too. Diamond Steven repeatedly rebuked White's attempts to purify him by saying, "She's gone," which refers not only to Pink Diamond, but Rose Quartz as well. And yet when Steven fuses with himself once again, he does so with a callback to something his mother told him on the VHS tape. Whenever he loves himself, that will be Rose loving him through himself. So his mother, or Pink Diamond, or whoever might be gone, but there are still traces of her love out there, making changes to the world she's not a part of. White Diamond throws a tantrum to see this Steven fused back to his old form, saying that he's imperfect, and Pink Diamond can't be gone. and when Steven points out that this emotional outburst is unbecoming of a perfect being, she begins to blush. The bright pink, highlighting on her face, and the faces of those she controls, are considered both an imperfection as well as a perfectly natural reaction to seeing the situation unfolding as it is. With this loss of perfection comes a loss of control of the other gems, as White realizes there's no such thing as a flawless gem if you can get a flaw from a positive experience, like watching a reunion. The diamonds and the crystal gems return in their ship to Earth, landing on the beach during the middle of a performance by Sadie Killer and the Suspects of Let Me Drive My Van Into Your Heart. This reunion is joined by Lars and the Off-Colors, who land just in time to see the diamonds, panicking for a bit before learning they've reformed. As Steven messed up Sadie's concert by landing in the middle of it, he makes it up to her by singing a rendition of the theme song over a montage of the diamonds getting together in Rose's Spring, where they mass unbubble the previously bubbled gems, reverting them all to their old forms, and creating a reunion of so many characters from earlier seasons. With Earth cured, the upper half of the diamonds leave to return to Homeworld, as the rest of the crystal gems sit on the shore of Beach City, recreating shots from the opening as Steven sings Change Your Mind with his friends. The main through line of Steven Universe has to do with the cost of conformity, the fact that getting everybody to behave in a consistent way winds up filing off the best parts of a person. It's carving a gem's edges off to be more aesthetic while leaving so much valuable material on the ground into dust. The Homeworld gems value, above all else, the conformity that makes each gem more like the others, to the point that they've ruined so much of themselves in an attempt to be less abrasive. But at the same time, it's impossible to tell one gem apart from another if you do make them all conform. This is a criticism that White Diamond makes of who she thinks is Pink, that she's surrounding herself by flawed gems to feel better about herself as they all serve her for being better than they are. Except, this is all a projection on her behalf. Why would White Diamond even bother making other gems instead of simply forcing everyone to be white like she is unless it were to feel superior? Why allow for faults and diversity unless it's just to be different by being better? The cost of conformity is not just a material one either. It's one that weighs ideologically on each member of gem society. For one, to believe that people are so stratified means accepting a subservience that's built into who you are. If there are people that you are naturally superior to, then it follows that there are those who are superior to you, and that no amount of effort you make can ever make that change. Of course, this is an ideology that only exists to serve those at the top, the very few who are content with being submissive to a higher power, so long as they can still act like they're better than someone else. Even the lowest in gem society get to pretend that they have some value because at least they aren't an off-color. They don't bother to ask what happens when all the off-colors are driven out. What does a society that holds itself together on exploitation do when the classes it's tolerable to exploit are successfully eliminated? It moves on to the next tier. It's like sitting on the beach, unconcerned with the flooding, until the water begins to lap at you. And all of this is done without a clear explanation of what the benefit is. What happens when everything is identical and purified? What is the ideal end result? One can argue that it's a world without conflict or differences or fighting, but this is contradicted in its entirety by the methods used to reach this point. When the diamonds are willing to corrupt an entire planet to protect their way of life, they only argue that their way of life is something that requires mass destruction to exist. This forces a conversation to occur. What were the off-colors doing that was so much worse than wiping all life from a failed colony? What about a restrictive society makes it worth that cost, and what stops the standards of Homeworld from changing on a whim in the future? Above all else, this sort of autocracy never answers the following question about conformity and flawlessness. If it's so natural, why do they need the military to enforce it? The crystal gems ultimately win by being open and honest with each other, forcing the conformists to see the one thing their ideology was never able to produce, empathy. Because the truth about being perfect is that it's impossible to be perfect. Everybody's version of perfect is different and largely based around their own faults and their strengths. White Diamond was so far inside her own head that she failed to see what advantage there could be to being different. So instead of learning this, she built a world where being different was wrong. Since the crystal gems made a world that belonged to everybody, it was a world where everybody belonged. Even the diamonds who had done so much to stop it from existing could only do so much before accepting they can never destroy something more powerful than they are. At that point, they could only accept their flaws as normal, and then change their minds.